Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcasts, it really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, it just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson, and back in his cupboard, it's Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going very well, Mark. Yeah, I am back in lockdown cupboard. We here in Glasgow are back in lockdown effectively, a sort of mini lockdown compared to the previous one. So for the next few weeks at least, we'll be coming to you from, well, me from my cupboard, you from your spacious room, as I can see over the video. But yeah, this is it for now. But other than that, I'm pretty good. I had all of last week away, headed to the hills, which was absolute bliss and much needed. So yeah, the hard times of August and early September are over pretty much. I feel like I can breathe again, Mark.
Well, that's good. Even though you're shut inside basically now, you can now feel as if you can breathe. So I'm sure there's something in that, really. Yeah. But good to hear, Lewis. Good to hear. Lewis, what have you been playing while you've been away?
Well, I did do what I said I was going to do on our special episode that you would have heard last week, which is...
Oh yeah, and thanks for indulging us on that special episode, which was just me talking about my favourite video games for a lengthy period of time. I thought it was a really good
episode, though. I really enjoyed being part of that one.
I hope the listeners enjoyed it too, Lewis. I hope they enjoyed it too.
But as I mentioned in that episode, I began my proper ascent through the world of Hollow Knight. Descent, I should probably say, as it's all about going down underground. So I'm just a few hours in. I had to replay a little bit at the start, which I'd previously done. I didn't actually begin the game again, but I kind of went back over some of the areas that I'd been in just to kind of re-familiarise, basically.
I think that you were so close to the beginning that it didn't matter either way, to be honest.
No, not
it didn't
massively.
Matter if you'd restarted or if you'd just continued your old save, you know?
Exactly that. But I had beaten a couple of difficult, not bosses, but kind of mini bosses, and I had also already got the first map and things like that. So I just didn't really want to begin totally afresh. But I kind of recapped on a guide to make sure I hadn't missed anything too substantial and just started playing again from that point. So I'm a few hours in, maybe 6 or 7 hours into the game now. Possibly should be further ahead than I am, but I don't feel like I'm very good at it at the moment.
It'll come in time, man.
This is the thing. It's such a learning curve.
No one starts feeling good at the game, I don't think, until at least the 3rd or 4th boss, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a little bit ahead of what I think of as more or less the first proper boss encounter. It may be the second, it's hard to say, but yeah, so I'm getting to grips with it. I feel like I'm starting to get a little better. I now have the dash ability, which is just, in terms of just like quality of life improvement in the game, it feels so important, because essentially my only issue so far with Hollow Knight, and it's fundamental to the design of Hollow Knight, it's not a flaw in the game necessarily, it's a flaw for me as the player, is that every time I die, which is disturbingly frequent at the moment, it sends you back to the last place you were able to rest on a bench, which sometimes can be a fair trek.
Metroidvania-esque, we will say here.
Well, exactly, yeah. Being sent back there sometimes means having to make quite a long journey back to a fight which I know I'm going to lose at again, and do that several times in repeat. And so literally just having the dash ability now means that journey is much faster, and it's much easier to avoid enemies that you can't be bothered fighting again, just to get back to the place where you did originally die.
Absolutely, man. You will find yourself using the dash almost as much as you use simply walking forward. Yeah. I basically dashed around the entire game from this point onwards. Getting the dash is a huge bonus, I would say.
I could feel myself just like spamming the trigger essentially as soon as I got it. So, I mean, that's the one downside for me, and that's only a downside again for me as a player and my tastes, and particularly how important time is to me in terms of my gaming habits. But the gameplay itself is phenomenal. The world that you're in is just absolutely ripe for exploring. I'm really excited to find out what the hell's going on in this place, because if you don't know anything about Hollow Knight, the game basically doesn't really give you very much at all. Like, you just start heading down into this kind of underground cavernous world, this huge map, and you fight a load of bugs, and that's almost as much as I know about it at this point, 6 or 7 hours into the game. So
yeah, as I said at the time, it was one of the best examples in any media I think I've ever consumed of show don't tell storytelling, which I I've said numerous times on this podcast that I really, really enjoy, and it's just subtle and not beating you over the head with anything, you know. And you do genuinely learn the lore just simply by playing the game. It's not as if you have to go out your way to like uncover a bunch of scrolls that explain the whole thing to you or anything like that. I loved all that. Like I absolutely loved all that about it. So I'm glad to hear that you are at least enjoying the world that you're in, even if you aren't enjoying the gameplay so much quite yet. But I still have hope. Like I think that another 5 to 10 hours, Lewis, and you'll be loving it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've got to say, even at this point, so there was a moment fighting that first boss. I don't know how much of a spoiler it is to mention that boss's name, so I'm not going to, but that fight and several even just fairly standard, although quite big enemies in the build-up to that moment, I was dying a lot. I was getting extremely frustrated. I was screaming at the television. I was pretty close to throwing my controller at one point, which I basically never do and haven't really done since playing Pro Ev when I was about 12. But I did after. It does that amazing thing basically where when you eventually do beat it, Cuphead was the same, when you do beat that conflict, you immediately think, this is the best fucking game. I'm so glad that I've got past that and now I've got some new challenge to come up against, you know. I was walking away from the game and thinking about it even though it had been a total stress to play. So I'm under no doubt at the moment that as long as I get better at it, that I will completely adore playing it, you know.
Yeah, and you do. This is another nice thing about the game, is that just simply by playing the game you do absolutely get better. And I don't think that anyone would pick up Hollow Knight and just be fantastic at it right away. I mean, I'm sure that there are some gaming gods out there that are just sensationally good at everything that they pick up immediately, but I certainly wasn't like this, and I definitely struggled at all these things that you were saying that you struggled at, and this is one of my favourite games ever. So I very much hope that you continue to enjoy it and continue to play it as much as it needs to be played as well, because I think that you were going through it and playing it in wee dribs and drabs even the first time that you went through it as well. You were sort of doing that, and really it's a game that demands a bit more of your time than that at any one particular time. I think that playing it for a couple of extended sessions in a row, it'll probably do wonders for how comfortable you are with the game and how those enemies that first seemed very, very difficult to you or very, very annoying to you suddenly become not a problem at all, you know?
What have you been playing?
Well, Liz, I've just been continuing my playthrough of Life is Strange, which is continued to amaze me, quite frankly, about how politically on the nose it is, both for the time that it was made and for the current times that we are living in. I'm not quite hooked on it yet, as much as I thought that I maybe would have been, but I can kind of feel it coming, if that makes sense. Like, I am nearly very, very invested in this story. Essentially, I'm starting to definitely feel more in love with it, sort of thing. Good. And I think this happened with Before the Storm, the Life is Strange 1 spin-off game, where I was initially starting to play it and I was thinking to myself, this isn't really as good as the first one. Didn't really find that it was clicking with me as much as the first one. And then by the end of that game, I might have liked that game more than the original Life is Strange. So I'm sort of feeling a similar thing happen to me now with Life is Strange 2. I don't really want to say too much about it at all, really, because the game is its narrative, you know what I mean? So I don't want to be talking about spoilers for anyone. But in terms of an episodic game, I always think to myself, would I have been satisfied just playing this section of the game and then having to wait 3 months or whatever it was, and sometimes longer, I think, than that, to get the next episode of this? I do always think that when you're trying to be critical of these games, that you do keep that in mind and about how they are supposed to be played. But I'm finding even still that binging is definitely just the way to go. Like, even in Telltale games that I've played, the other Don't Nod games that I've played, any episodic game that I've played, I have always thought to myself, God, I'm so glad that I never played this in an episodic manner. And I don't know if that's just me, but
I suspect
I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, that's really good. I was worried that you were going to be a wee bit negative about it there at the start, but it does sound like it's maybe just going to take a couple episodes more to get really kind of sunk into that story. So, I mean, there's been lots of good things said about it, particularly the latter episodes. So I'm actually really excited to get to it eventually.
But I think that that's the problem with the game, though, right? The problem with the game was that people didn't feel connected to it right away, do you know what I mean? Or there was a sort of slump in the middle, which I don't even know if I'm in yet. You know what I mean? Like, I thought that the first two were great, but I don't know if playing these games in such a staggered manner, you kind of think, oh, well, that one wasn't as good as that one, whereas I'm seeing this as like a whole rolling story, which isn't how most people experience it, you know? So it's difficult for me to say, but the first 2 episodes I thought anyway, and I think I'm most of the way through the second one now.
Good.
I've been really good. Like I've really enjoyed them, and as I said about the kind of political aspect of it all, is that I really admire the fact that they are completely wearing their politics on their sleeve, and they are making a game that is 100% political, and in a world where a certain portion of the gaming community are screaming about, oh, video games shouldn't be political. They've just completely ignored that. They've just went, no, they totally can be, and this is how they can be, and we're going to tell a highly political story with these 2 kids on the run in Trump's America. And for 2 immigrant kids, what does that mean? Well, one of them has superpowers. It's fucking great. It's good. Anyway, Lewis, I think it's time for the news. All right, Lewis. Now, today's news is going to be a little bit different because since we've been away, 2 colossal events have happened in video games. The first being the PlayStation 5 showcase and the fallout thereof, which is just so much news in and of itself. And also, Xbox have bought Bethesda, which, again, is just a colossal, monumental shift in all things video games, as far as I'm concerned. So, the news will be very much focused on these 2 things. And we won't be having a topic of the week this week because there is so much news here, but we will be having some shout-outs at the end to cover other sections of the news that have happened in the week since we've been away. All right, Lewis, well, news item number 1, I guess, is the PlayStation 5 showcase and everything that PlayStation have done since that showcase. But let's start off with the showcase itself, Liz. Let's start off with the showcase itself. And it opened by announcing Final Fantasy 16, which is a strong open, you have to say. It's a very, very strong open. The game looks much more like a modern Final Fantasy game, which honestly isn't something that I'm overly interested in. I was very much hoping that the battle system from Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I loved, which I thought was so good, and such a excellent combination of the action-focused DMC route that the modern games have been taking and paying homage to the original Final Fantasies, the turn-based, the menu-driven combat that those games had. But this very much looks as though it's going to be purely down that DMC route, which, I mean, okay, that's fine. If that's something you're into, then cool. The game also did show a lot of lone combat, which I thought was interesting because obviously a big part of Final Fantasy and the Final Fantasy series is that you are in a team. So I hope that that isn't going to be a fixture of the whole game, basically, and that you aren't going to have lengthy stretches where it's just you fighting things, because, again, that really isn't what Final Fantasy is for me. So I'm a little bit tepid on this. It's much more of a modern Final Fantasy game than I'd want it to be. I kind of thought that we were moving on from the solely DMC style combat and maybe coming back to some of the menu-driven stuff because of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, but alas,
not to be. Yeah, not what you were after, I suppose. I don't have much to add on it. It looked like more Final Fantasy to me, and I don't have a strong sense of what the series has been doing in latter games, but do you think that other fans feel differently to you? Is that specific to you?
I don't know. I really don't know. I've not had my finger on the pulse of the Final Fantasy world for quite a while, to be honest with you, because when they started going online and then when Final Fantasy 15 came out and it was much more of this sort of combat, I sort of was like, oh, I'm over this now. This isn't the games that I love. This isn't why I love Final Fantasy. So from then on, I was sort of disengaged from the community. So I don't really know. That's an interesting question. I think that the response generally to Final Fantasy 16's announcement has been positive.
Yeah.
So I think that there are definitely people out there that want to play this version of Final Fantasy, so great for them. But for me personally, not what I was looking for from a new Final Fantasy game. After that was Spider-Man Miles Morales, which honestly looked fucking great. It looked really, 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 really good. And just from the section of gameplay which we got to see, it looks like the combat is more dynamic than what we got in the original, which was sadly lacking, I would say, from the original. It was basically just bash square until the guy died and then move on to the next one. So the combat was definitely a bit of a letdown in that game. So if this is going to be more dynamic combat, then 2 thumbs up for me. Massive thumbs up for me. Nothing really to complain about here, to be honest with you. I thought that the combat looked great.
Yeah, combat looked massively improved, like you said. The whole thing looked like it brought the fluidity of the traversal and put that much more into the combat. You know, Miles Morales in the big long gameplay section that we saw was flying about all over the place. But beyond that, the game just looks really visually beautiful. We saw Harlem in the snow, which was like a new area for the game. It wasn't in the original.
Yep.
Other than that, it doesn't look like it's changed too much, but I don't think it really needs to. It's a continuation of that story, essentially, so we don't need the game to make massive big leaps or anything. It's just like bring this character to the forefront and add some new flavours to it, you know?
Yeah, and it looks as if they're doing that 100%, and I'm very, very excited about this. I'm very, very excited about it. Next up was the Harry Potter game, the fabled Harry Potter game, which is called Hogwarts Legacy. It's set in Hogwarts in the 1800s, and honestly, looks surprisingly good.
It looks alright,
surprisingly good. I know, again, that it's a bit uncool to be interested in Harry Potter these days, particularly considering J.K. Rowling continually proves herself to be a total arsehole. But I would describe myself as curious about this game. I do wonder if the game is going to be more online focused in a sort of Avengers way. However, if it was a more single-player campaign, I would probably be more interested in it, and that probably is going to be what determines my interest in the game, you know?
Yeah, so if it is single-player, you think that you would possibly give it a bash? Obviously, with much more
possibly,
to be seen.
Yeah. Again, I think mechanically it looked pretty good. I think that visually it looked pretty good as well. I don't really have too many complaints about it. It'd be interesting to learn more. But yeah, if it is going to be online-focused, which honestly I suspect that it probably will be, I'm not sure how interested I would really be in that. You know, but if it was a single player narrative driven game, then yeah, absolutely. I don't see why I wouldn't be interested in that, you know. After that was Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Honestly, it looked like Call of Duty. I thought that there was some questionable voice acting in this short gameplay trailer, personally, and the action was ludicrous, but Call of Duty in it. The most interesting thing about the trailer probably was the fact that PlayStation 4 gamers were going to get early access to the multiplayer campaign on October the 8th and 9th and October the 10th and 12th. So those weekends you'll be getting early access to the multiplayer, which I thought was cool and is obviously good for PlayStation gamers. However, this sort of exclusivity of third-party games I'd never really feel great about, to be honest, but that was probably the biggest announcement here. After that was Resident Evil 8 Village. I'm not really sure if we're supposed to call it Resident Evil Village or if we're supposed to call it Resident Evil 8 Village. I've kind of seen both, but I'm sticking with the full title for now. They seem to be very much leaning into this grim fairy tale vibe, in that it's not strictly zombies this time round, which I actually think is an incredibly bold choice for the series, and one that I'm quite into. I am not sure how the general public is going to react to that, however.
Yeah, it's certainly a risk to take playing with that formula. I can imagine a bad backlash if it does become werewolves and fairies and witches and all sorts, but who knows, you know?
That's the interesting thing, isn't it? Is that it was said from a leak ages and ages and ages ago that this was going to be more hallucinogenic and occult focused and things like that. So moving away from the traditional Umbrella Corp poisoning the water supply or whatever and turning everyone into zombies, do you know what I mean? So this seems to be much more magical. And I just wonder how the public are going to react to that. I think that is fascinating. I think that's a really, really interesting choice, but I'm not sure that will go down terribly well. Alright, after that was Deathloop. Continues to look awesome. I don't really have too much else to say about this, but I continue to love the absolutely beautiful pulpy vibe of it all. This by Arcane Studios as well, which obviously has a fantastic reputation. Really, really looking forward to this game, man. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it looks totally incredible. Great bit of gameplay they showed off. It just, continues to massively impress. Really, really excited about it.
After that was Devil May Cry Special Edition, which includes a new character and includes a legendary Dark Knight mode, turbo mode and ray tracing support, and apparently can run up to 128 frames per second on the PlayStation 5, which is pretty cool. The edition is not coming to PC, interestingly, which is just a bit of a weird fact. I don't know why they wouldn't do that. I think Capcom have a bad reputation of bringing things to PC, and the PC community know this. I honestly have absolutely no interest in DMC.
No.
I do not vibe with the property at all. But if you do, look out for the special edition. It will be coming to your PlayStation 5, I believe, on launch day. After that, a game that I'm very, very interested in, ludicrously interested in actually, is Oddworld Soulstorm. This game looks absolutely amazing. I love it so much. Every time I see it, I just have like joyous feelings that I just want to play it immediately. Me and Lewis have a long history with the Oddworld series. probably one of the first PlayStation 1 games we ever played together, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was one of the first PS1 games I owned, yeah.
And this new installment just looks amazing and ludicrous and so much fun, and just looks like those games brought forward into the 21st century, you know?
And scaled up massively.
Yeah, I'm so excited about it. I am like giddy excited about this game.
I was so glad we got to see more at last. We've had a couple of teasers before, but it's been a long time brewing. But yeah, I thought this looked fantastic. It looks like those old games, but just multiply it by 10, 100 times. It's just the amount of characters you saw on screen, the levels of explosions, the intricacy of the level design. It looks stunning. Can't wait for it. Just don't sleep on it. If you don't know Oddworld at all, check it out, because it might not look like the kind of thing that you would naturally be interested in, but it is a hilarious series of games, and just a total joy to play. All the previous ones anyway.
Honestly, one of the best puzzle platformers I've ever played in my life, with a really fantastic narrative attached to it as well. It's just fantastic. Really, really good. After that was Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. Now, I don't know much about this series apart from the fact that it is a cult classic, it's terrifying, and might as well be called the jump scare of the game. But I know that it has a huge following, and for fans, I'm sure you're delighted that there was going to be a new one. I have no interest in shitting my pants while I'm playing a video game. After that was the Demon Souls remake. This time we got to see a good amount of gameplay. It looks visually stunning. I think that's what we have to start off saying. Yeah. It looks absolutely beautiful. However, the dude playing it seemed to be one-shotting everything, or being an absolute god, not taking a single hit all the way up to the boss, and then got absolutely destroyed by the boss. Although maybe that's indicative of just all Dark Souls gameplay. Yeah. But the game does look incredible. It looks really, really good. I'm so interested in playing this game, and I just don't know if I will actually be able to. But it has been confirmed, I believe, that this will be on the PS5 day one.
Yeah, as you said, looks stunning. I'm exactly the same boat as you, where every part of me wants to play it, but I'm terrified of playing it. I may never get round to giving it the time that it needs, but I have a lot of Souls playing friends, and they're all really excited, including some who've played the original game, who are really excited to get back into this remake. So it's definitely ticking boxes for those people who have been looking out for this for a while, you know?
Yeah, definitely. After that was Fortnite. I believe this was already confirmed to be coming to the PlayStation 5, but we got to see some gameplay of it in the PlayStation 5. Honestly, it looked like Fortnite. It looked like Fortnite on the PlayStation 5. I literally don't think that I can say anything more about it. And finally, the last game that we were shown to close out the whole show, the one more thing at the end, was a symbol for God of War Ragnarok coming in 2021. We only got to see a logo, Lewis, but you seem to think that this might not be a full title.
Not necessarily. There was some suggestion on Twitter among other gaming people that basically my first thought was, how have they turned that around within 3 years? So if it launches in 2021, it will be maximum 3.5 years since the first game launched, and that to me feels like a short development cycle. However, we did get that sort of statement from Sony recently in one of their investor calls that they're looking to speed up first party development. We've also held multiple rumours that they are keen on making the first full year of PS5 akin to the first year of the Switch, where it's just hit after hit after hit. So you could see that they might be speeding Sony Santa Monica up to get that game out in time. But there was a suggestion that it could be more of a Lost Legacy style sort of mini, or like Miles Morales, a smaller game than the full God of War 2 that we might expect. I don't personally think that it's that likely, but I also don't think if it is a full sequel that it will actually make 2021.
Well, I would agree with that second part. I think the chances of God of War 2 or God of War Ragnarok, whatever we're calling it, making 2021 is pretty fucking slim, honestly. Yeah. I really don't necessarily believe that myself, but it's good to know it's there. It's good to know it's coming.
It's going to sell consoles. At the next one
of these showcases, we might get to see Kratos again, which will be fucking great. Then, Lewis, one of the big announcements from this that wasn't the games was the PlayStation Plus collection. Now, this is a collection of PS4 games that will be available to digitally download on the PS5 at launch. And these games include Batman Arkham Knight, Battlefield 1, Bloodborne, Days Gone, Detroit Become Human, Fallout 4, Final Fantasy 15, God of War, Infamous Second Son, Monster Hunter World, Mortal Kombat 10, Persona 5, Ratchet & Clank, Resident Evil 7, The Last Guardian, The Last of Us Remastered, Uncharted 4 and Until Dawn. Now, that is a lot of absolute bangers there, Liz. That is a lot of good bloody games, which is really cool that they are just giving you access to day one on the PlayStation 5. Like, I think that that's really good. Obviously, this is a sort of a response to Games Pass, but obviously nowhere near as good as that. But it's nice to know that they are thinking about players coming across day one. What will they have to play? Oh, well, you'll have all of this.
Yeah, it builds an instant library, and it builds a library of classic games from the prior generation, which to me isn't massively exciting because most of the games from that list that I would want to play, I have already played. But that said,
this is true.
Having them at launch of the console is great. There'll be games there that you and I haven't played, and plenty of games that other gamers who even have owned a PS4 won't have touched and might give a shot to, given that there won't be too much else out at launch. So yeah, it's a great offer. Like you said, it doesn't quite match up to Game Pass, but it shows you that Sony are aware that they have to start making some moves like this. I think the interesting things are that The Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima weren't included in that. Spider-Man, the original game, wasn't included in that. So it's not a straightforward Sony first-party offer. It's much more of a curated selection of slightly older games. I mean, Mortal Kombat 10 instead of 11 even is an interesting thing.
Yeah, that was a strange one, I have to admit.
Yeah, so it looks like there's a kind of cut-off of a couple of years ago. But that's fine. You know, it's about putting these games onto a new system and giving you some stuff to play when you get it on launch day.
Yeah. Also, we don't really know if these will be the PS4 versions of these games or these will be souped up PS5 versions of these games either. I very much suspect it'll be the PS4 versions, honestly. But nonetheless, it's good to have that library of games of some absolute bangers just ready to go out of the box. And after that, Lewis, the big one, of course, the price and the date. So starting off with the price, honestly, it's really fucking good. Like, I was really pleased with the price. The main PlayStation 5 is going to be $500 or £450, which is the same as the Xbox Series X, which is actually really good because I thought that it was going to be more. And the discless version is going to be $400 or £360, which is only $100 more than the Series S, and honestly I thought it was going to be even more than that. So I actually think that these are two pretty good price points for the main PS5 and the discless PS5. And unlike the Series S, when comparing it to the discless PS5, the Series S has to compromise quite significantly on hardware. I don't think there's any other way of looking at that, really. Whereas the discless PS5 is the same as the main PS5, but without a disc drive. I mean, that is literally the only difference in terms of hardware. So you are still getting a full next-gen console for, quotes, only $100 more than the Xbox Series X. Now, that $100 is, of course, a lot of money. Of course it is. But in terms of the compromises that we're now seeing that have to be made on the Series S, maybe that extra $100 might be worth it for you, you know, if you are deciding on what one to buy day one, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Extremely competitive pricing from Sony. I agree totally with what you just said about the difference between the S and the discless PS5. That's the decision now for a lot of gamers coming in at that lower end. Do you value having the full next-gen experience and are you willing to pay that a wee bit more, or are you looking to get a Game Pass box effectively? I think a lot of people will come down to that decision, but the fact that they have matched the Series X on pricing I think is very important for the success of the PS5 at launch as well.
Totally agree. I totally agree. I think that was really, really, really important for them to do. I honestly thought, I have said it all along, that I thought it was going to be more expensive. So the fact that it is the same price as the Xbox Series X, that was a joy to hear for me. A joy to hear. Then after that was the dates. The PS5 will be released on November the 12th in the US, Japan, Canada, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand and South Korea, but the rest of the world, including us here in the UK and the rest of Europe, will have to wait until November the 19th. Do you care that we have to wait another week?
Not really, no. Can't say I do.
No, me neither. Not even remotely. Hasn't crossed my mind as something to care about, but some people do seem to care about that, and I don't really know why. However, there has been much chat around the fact that the PS5 supply line could have been hampered by COVID. And while I'm sure it almost certainly has been hampered by COVID in some capacity, as the Xbox One will have done as well, it seems that it's been denied almost every turn by PlayStation that there has been any problem in the supply line. And while I am inclined to believe them when it comes to some of the more outrageous claims that were out there, and that there was going to be like absolutely no PS5s and they would all be sold out and no one would be able to get one for Christmas, I simply don't believe any of that nonsense. However, I think that this situation might be a little bit no smoke without fire, and that maybe they need that extra week for the rest of the world to maybe catch up, you know?
Yeah, I think that probably does make sense. It's about the logistics and the timings of getting things from warehouses shipped all across different continents. Like you said, I don't think it matters too much. I can see why it would matter for streamers, maybe, but beyond that, it's only a few extra days. It's only, 9 days after the Series X launches. I think we've been waiting this long, you know, it's just not that big a deal.
No, and certainly not for me. Well, Lewis, that was all the stuff from the showcase itself. However, there has been quite a lot of fallout from there, and that is basically all the good news, because we're about to enter a sea of shit from PlayStation, and it's going to start with the pre-orders. So, back in August, PlayStation's head of marketing, Eric Lampel, said this:
I think it's safe to say we'll let you know when pre-orders will happen. It's not going to happen with a minute's notice. We're going to, at some point, let you know when you can pre-order a PS5, so please don't feel like you have to go run and line up anywhere until you receive official notice on how that will work.
But PlayStation announced the pre-orders immediately after the showcase, and said that the pre-orders would be as early as the next day, the day after the showcase, which to me doesn't sound like a lot of notice, Lewis. That doesn't sound like a lot of notice to me. However, it gets even worse than that, because this turned out to be a lie, because retailers immediately after the showcase, announced that they were taking pre-orders for the PlayStation 5 in the US and in the UK and in other countries in Europe. They were announcing that the pre-orders were live right now. So this immediately caused a massive internet scramble to get a PS5 order in, which then subsequently meant that a lot of people missed out, including me, because I've now tried twice to get a PS5 and have either been kicked out of the website entirely for no apparent reason, or have been seemingly unable to add the PlayStation 5 to my basket to be able to pre-order it. Yeah. So I could not get a PlayStation 5 because of this fucking farce. So I'm annoyed about that, Lewis. This was such a shit show that Xbox have actually jumped on the opportunity to announce very clearly their own pre-orders and when they would go live, and in the process poke a bit of fun at PlayStation. Now, it is also worth pointing out that the Xbox pre-orders actually went live today as we are recording this, and there have been some problems with that as well. It seems that some retailers are having problems. I know that Game in the UK was down for a long period of time. I know that the Microsoft website, the Microsoft store themselves have been down as well and have had problems taking pre-orders, but at least they got the day right, Lewis. At least they got the time right of when you're supposed to pre-order it. It's absolutely fucking madness that they've managed to get this wrong. It's crazy. This has went so badly for PlayStation that they had to make an apology on Twitter a couple of days ago, and they said this:
let's be honest, PS5 pre-orders could have been a lot smoother. We truly apologise for that. Over the next few days, we will release more PS5 consoles for pre-order. Retailers will share more details, and more PS5s will be available through the end of the year.
Yeah, let's be honest, PlayStation, it was a fucking shit show. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, totally shambolic from start to finish, basically. They failed to even really properly announce it in their own showcase. It all came out on Twitter afterwards. Then pre-orders were starting. Then they were running out. I had the same issue as you with things adding to my basket and then disappearing. They completely lost control of the narrative of this whole process, and it's not a good look.
It certainly is not. I mean, this is the launch of your new piece of hardware. This is what it's all been building towards, and you've fucked it up so royally at the last hurdle. It was insane. But Lewis, wait, there is more bullshit from PlayStation. And this one particularly pissed me off. It really did. It has also been confirmed by PlayStation, after having gone on about how much they believe in generations, that Spider-Man Miles Morales, Sackboy The Big Adventure, and Horizon Forbidden West will all be cross-generational titles. So, the reason why I'm so annoyed about this, Lewis, is because I have a podcast that's called PlayersToo, right? And we've been going on about how Xbox have been trying to straddle the generations and how this has hampered Halo specifically, which was supposed to be the big flagship title for how they were going to launch their console. And we've always been saying that, yeah, PlayStation are doing the right thing here. They're drawing a line under the PS4 and they are launching these new games, and that's going to be great, and it's going to really show off all the hardware, and it's going to be superb. And as it turns out, they're doing exactly the same fucking thing. They're doing exactly the same thing. Now, they haven't went quite as far as Xbox. Xbox had previously said that they would be supporting the Xbox One for up to 2 years, although I now don't believe that, and they themselves seem to be backtracking on that. But I mean, I feel as though I am justified in feeling hard done by here. I feel as if I've been lied to by PlayStation as well now, because I truly feel that we were led to believe as gamers, as PlayStation fans, that these would be the next gen games, these would be full next gen titles, but they're not. And everything in their messaging said that they would be. They believe in generations. They want to draw a line under this. We went to all the trouble to make this new hardware, and we want to really, really show it off. And they're not. Yeah. And they're not. They are still doing exactly the same thing as Xbox are doing and straddling the generations. Now, there's not that much wrong with that, really. My problem with Xbox really was that it was going to be 2 years down the line and they would still be straddling the generations. Mm-hmm. But to do this at launch is a kind of normal move. But don't lie about it.
Yeah.
Don't lie about it. That's what I'm annoyed about. I definitely feel lied to, and that's why I'm annoyed.
I can tell. I mean, I think
I'm so annoyed about this, Lewis. I really am. Because they've made a liar out of me on my podcast. Because I've been saying that they are going to be doing this thing. Yeah. And everything about what they've been saying has suggested that they did believe in generations and that they would have this generational break and that all of the new games would be taking advantage of the hardware. And that was something that was really, really fucking exciting. Mm-hmm. And they're not doing that.
Yeah. I think it's particularly problematic for Horizon. I'm not surprised in a way that Spider-Man and certainly that Sackboy can be cross-generational. I don't think other than some, small adjustments within Spider-Man particularly that it will feel all that different to the original game. But Horizon felt to me like their first big step into the new generation, the first full-scale,
that one was
sequel.
Particularly shocking.
Yeah.
That was particularly shocking. And I was particularly annoyed about that, yeah. Which is a game that it was so good as well. The first game was so good, and I was so excited to have the next gen version of that game and how that could look on next gen hardware. But it's going to be held back by the PlayStation 4. It just does.
Which then also means you won't get a true next-gen feeling experience of Horizon until, years down the line, like towards the end of the PS5 generation, if they make another sequel to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, not good.
How do you feel about this, though? I'm extremely annoyed about this. I'm sure you can tell in the tone of my voice that I am extremely annoyed about this. Does this bother you at all? Again, I feel lied to here.
Yeah.
Do you feel lied to?
I do and I don't, because they haven't very definitively said it at any point, but they said so much around it that I think it's fair to assume that titles would be generational exclusives. As I say, I'm not particularly bothered about it, partly because I'm not 100% certain I'm going to get a PS5 on launch day anyway. I'm also not massively bothered about playing any of these specific games on PS5. I didn't play the original Horizon. I'm quite comfortable playing Miles Morales on PS4 if needs be. It doesn't feel like that big a deal to me, but I do totally accept that while it's generally good for gamers that both platforms are being supported, because then you don't have to make the generational jump, particularly in that case of Horizon, it really dials down any excitement that I might have had for it, because it feels like it's just the sequel that could have come out a year ago on the PS4,
Yeah, well, it could have done, and it can do, and it will do. I mean, It is coming out on the PS4. You can play it as much on the PS4 as you can play it on the PS5. That was really the one that was so disappointing. I mean, that was really disappointing to hear that, because that is the one that I thought, this is going to be the big smash hit out the gates, really taking advantage of the hardware, really doing what I was hoping was going to be some really interesting things that could literally only be done on the next generation of hardware, and that is simply not the case, and that is so disappointing. All right, Lewis, and news item number 2, I guess, after all that. Xbox have bought ZeniMax Media for $7.5 billion. And if you don't know who they are, you're about to, because they own Bethesda, and Bethesda Publishing, and Bethesda Studios, and id Software, and Arcane Studios, and Machine Games, and Tango Gameworks, and AlphaDog, and Roundhouse Studios. And if you don't know who they are, well, 1, where have you been? But 2, they make these games, including the Elder Scrolls series, the Fallout series, the Doom series, the Dishonored series, the Wolfenstein series, the Prey series, the Rage series, the Evil Within series, the Quake series, and the upcoming game Starfield. So Xbox now own all of them. We were just talking before the podcast about how genuinely nearly unbelievable this is, to the point that I'm still struggling to come to terms with the fact that Xbox now own all of those studios, and some of those studios are absolutely amazing as well, like Arcane and Machine Games, Bethesda themselves, and Tango Gameworks in particular are fucking awesome studios, and own some of the biggest titles in video game, like literally some of the biggest IP in video games are now owned by Xbox, which is, again, literally nearly unbelievable.
Yeah.
Bethesda's Todd Howard has said this regarding the purchase.
We share a deep belief in the fundamental power of games and their ability to connect, empower and bring joy. And a belief we should bring that to everyone, regardless of who you are, where you live or what you play on, regardless of the screen size, the controller or your ability to even use one. We can't think of a better group of people to do that with than those at Xbox. We have friendships that go back to those original days. From Phil to senior leaders to developer support, they don't just talk about putting players first, they passionately live it.
Now, I think that this is probably the most significant studio purchase in recent memory, if not ever. This is such a huge deal for such a colossal amount of money as well. Yeah. Colossal amount of money. And it was also announced the day before the Xbox Series X and S pre-orders went live, which I think was a stroke of genius by Xbox as well. Yeah, I think that was no mistake. I think that exclusivity is obviously the thing that has come up immediately after this announcement. And Phil Spencer has said that Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo, both of which were going to be published by Bethesda, and both of which are timed exclusives for the PlayStation 5. They will honour that, and they will publish them as timed exclusives for the PlayStation 5, which is really good, really genuinely good to hear that. But it does mean that we are now in an odd world where Microsoft and Xbox are publishing games exclusively for the PlayStation 5, which is absolutely bizarre. However, on the future games, including The Elder Scrolls 6 and Starfield, according to Phil Spencer, will launch on the Xbox and PC and, quotes, other consoles on a case-by-case basis. Now, other consoles on a case-by-case basis, to me, means that if they have something that is appropriate for a handheld, for example, Ori going to the Switch, then that game might be put onto the Switch. But I think in terms of games to PlayStation, I think that they're thinking that PlayStation can go and fuck themselves, quite frankly, and that they are never going to see any of these titles ever again. Or if they do, in the most ideal scenario, they will be on the PlayStation 5 a year after they've already been on Xbox Games Pass, and by the time they've been on PC, and everyone's already played them by that point. Yeah. So I doubt that it will make a massive amount of difference to either PlayStation 5 gamers or to Xbox themselves, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's just enormous. I think you're right about that. The exclusivity issue, it's a big one for people, because a lot of people who have made their decision about which console they're going to buy might be feeling a bit afraid of this, a bit let down by it, that certain games, certain franchises that they've loved, they might not have access to anymore. I can see that there are good arguments for Xbox for not making those games exclusive. For example, if you put out another Doom and it's only on Xbox and Game Pass, but there's a 100 million PS4s or 50 million PS5s in the wild, you will make more money if you can sell those games there. And so they could well see that as a way you can sell that at a premium, you can put that at full price, whereas players on your system are going to get it much cheaper through Game Pass effectively. Because I don't see how Microsoft recoups $7.5 billion by selling only games on their platform, and specifically selling Game Pass. We know as of, I think just this morning, that they now have 15 million Game Pass subscribers. And they obviously want that number to grow exponentially. But even at 100 million Game Pass subscribers, which they're nowhere near, that's still only, $100 million or whatever a month? Like, they've still got a lot of ways to make up. And then there's the development costs on top of all of that. So there's huge financial questions here. But Microsoft simply can do this. And that is quite a mammoth thing, you know?
I mean, Microsoft are a $1 trillion company and can afford to drop $7.5 billion on studios like this. And Sony can't. Simple as that. So Sony can't compete with this amount of money, I don't believe anyway. I don't think it would be financially viable for Sony to make this move in the same way that it is probably completely safe for Microsoft to make this move. And in terms of making the money back, I'm not really sure that Xbox are seeing this as, oh well, we need to get this amount of money back by Games Pass subscriptions and whatever. Like, I think that there's a whole other dimension to this that we're not even really thinking about, like the additional hardware sales that they're going to get from this, because if I wasn't buying an Xbox already, which I probably was going to do at some point, then I definitely am now. I definitely am now. Like, there's no two ways about that. But not just that, I mean, there's a lot of additional clout and a lot of advertising and a lot of, like, even other stuff like figurines of Doom Guy and for like the Elder Scrolls series as well. You know what I mean? There's loads of additional ways that they can make a colossal amount of money back from this.
Oh yeah.
I don't think that it's necessarily, well, we have to make $7.5 million in Bethesda game sales to make this worth it for us. I really don't think that they are thinking about it in that capacity at all. And in terms of will they bring these games to X amount of PlayStations that are going to be in the wild, I don't think that you're going to spend $7.5 billion on studios to continually line your competitors' pockets with money. I don't think that that is a very good strategy by Xbox. Like, you could easily say the same thing about PlayStation in the PlayStation 3 era, that they could have made more money from The Last of Us Part 1 or the Uncharted series that was going on at that time, or whatever, by releasing them on the much more Xbox 360s there were in the wild at that time. But they didn't do that, obviously, because that, I don't think, is a very good strategy, and I don't think it's a very good strategy now. So unfortunately for me and every PlayStation 5 gamer in the world, I think that these games will relatively soon be locked behind a Games Pass subscription, or will come to PlayStation, and even the most ideal scenario will come to PlayStation 6 months to a year down the line. Now, the only thing that I can think to combat that argument is that Xbox have said a lot that they don't believe in generational exclusivity, unlike what PlayStation were saying. They were saying that we should all be able to play together. We're saying that we shouldn't be able to put up these virtual walls between us, between hardware. We should all be able to play together, regardless of what hardware we've got. Now, it will be very, very interesting to see if Xbox are going to put their money where their mouth is, and when the Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, if that is going to launch on PlayStation at the same time as that it launches on Xbox, because somehow I very, very much doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, despite everything I said there, I do think you're probably right. I think the idea of putting your own first-party games on another system, I mean, why wouldn't they be doing it already? Why is there no argument for Halo to be on the PS5 if you are going to argue that Elder Scrolls 6 or Doom, the next Doom game or whatever, should also become
it's the same
cross-platform?
argument. Exactly, it's the same argument that could be happening now. I mean, Xbox could make more money if they put Gears Tactics on the PlayStation 5. Yeah. They're a far bigger hardware deficit now than they likely will be in the next generation. So why haven't they been doing that for years? Because it's not a very good strategy.
Well,
that's
exactly.
Why.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that it will be a good strategy for Bethesda moving forward now.
Yeah, well, exactly. For Bethesda, they're thinking, we've got the money, it doesn't really matter to us anymore where we sell our games, I suppose. But that's the other side of that coin. You could see a world where Microsoft use this as leverage. And, for example, maybe the one way that these games come to PlayStation, and Phil Spencer can hold this out as an olive branch to PlayStation gamers, is to say, we'll happily put them on PlayStation through Game Pass. And it's then up to Sony to allow Game Pass to come to PlayStation, which would be a fucking incredible move. And one, again, it's really good for gamers.
Move.
But my God, what a moment that would be.
That would be incredible.
And it's the
I
kind
hope
of
that happens.
I think that's the thing to bear in mind about this deal. I mean, I'm sure anyone hearing this for the first time or that has been following this over the last few days, it is mind blowing stuff. It is colossal business stuff within the video game world. But just bear that in mind. Like, this is a deal of the magnitude that's the kind of thing that could come from it. Sony are not in a position to just say, well, we don't want those games anyway. We won't listen to any offers about that. We don't care about it. These are I keep mentioning Doom because Doom is so intrinsic to the fabric of video game history that the idea that it is now just not available on other platforms, it's crazy. It just feels so bizarre to be saying that out loud, that a franchise like that is just, and Fallout and all these games that over the last few years, the last couple of generations, have just been ubiquitous and they've been everywhere. I mean, Skyrim, my God, I mean, the joke about Skyrim
famously
is that
on everything.
You can play it fucking
famously
everywhere.
On everything.
Yeah, and so now you can't. Now you can play it on Xbox or wherever Xbox laterally decide that you can play it, and that is huge.
Yeah, massive. I mean, I don't think it can really be understated how big a deal this is, both literally in terms of the video gaming landscape and in terms of money. Yeah. It is massive, massive, and it will be very, very interesting to see what will come of this in the years to come. It is fantastic that Xbox will be honouring Ghostwire Tokyo and Deathloop coming to PlayStation as timed exclusives, because they've marketed that to fans that way for quite a while now. And to then renege on this at this point when the consoles are just on the horizon would have been pretty bad. So that's really good. But in terms of going forward, I really don't think that as PlayStation gamers we'll be seeing many Bethesda games at all.
Yeah.
Alright, and finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout outs. Shout out number one, there was also a Nintendo Direct Mini this week, Lewis, and on any other week this would probably be a news item. However, we simply do not have the time to run through every single announcement from the Direct Mini, but the big ones were that we're getting a new Monster Hunter game, Monster Hunter Rising, which is coming on March the 26th. This is the next mainline Monster Hunter game, but it's currently only announced for Switch, which I think is quite interesting. As me and you were just talking about before we started recording the podcast, the Monster Hunter games were traditionally Nintendo and were traditionally handheld.
Yeah.
So that is quite interesting in and of itself. But also a second Monster Hunter game was announced, Monster Hunter Stories 2. This is a sequel to Monster Hunter Stories, and is more of a traditional RPG and focuses much more on the narrative than the main series does. The original game also had turn-based mechanics as well, which is right up my street. And this will be coming out in Q3 2021, apparently. So that's quite interesting that we're getting a lot more Monster Hunter, and quite interesting as well that it's only coming to the Switch after Monster Hunter World was so fantastically loved across the board. PlayStation, Xbox, PC, the lots, you know, and this one's only been announced for Switch is an interesting move by Nintendo, we will say. After that was Hades, which was shadow dropped on Switch, this by Supergiant of Bastion and Transistor fame, which we have just done as play-along games. And it has also got a full release on PC now as well, after being nearly 2 years in early access. Currently it is sitting with a Metacritic score of 93, and by all accounts is fucking great.
Yeah. Everyone seems very excited about this, myself included. I think as we've said before when we were talking about Supergiant, that Hades has kind of been on my radar for a little while. It had this long beta phase effectively, and I am so excited to play this. I'm so glad that it got the reviews that it's been getting, and the fact that it's shadow dropped is just out now and we can all dive into it. Yeah, definitely. I must admit it's been one that I've been a little bit tepid on, just because it is more of that roguelike game, which isn't usually up my street particularly. And the last roguelike game I played was Dead Cells, which was also absolutely loved by critics, and I thought it was good, but I didn't really want to keep playing it, to be honest with you. I probably didn't want to play it as much as I actually did in the end. But yeah, it's just not usually one of the genres that I'm into, but I mean, the reviews are hard to ignore, let's be honest. And we know personally how good their other games can be, so yeah, we do, and they are absolutely superb. After that was Empire of Sin, Lewis. Now, this got a release date for December the 1st, and this is a game by John Romero. And if you don't know who John Romero is, Google him, because you should if you're interested in video games. Now, Lewis, you are surprisingly interested in this game, I would say. Oh yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I think it was due earlier in the year, but then got delayed for a bit, and so it's good that it's finally got this release date, that it's coming soon. Basically, this is a turn-based sort of strategy game, a bit like XCOM, but set in Chicago in the Prohibition era. You play as gangsters. I think you can choose a different kind of mob to take control of, and you kind of play as the boss of that, but it then has this kind of more overworld strategic control of the city vibe going on. So it's got these two axes basically that you're playing on, which XCOM has to a certain extent. Certainly XCOM Chimera Squad, which I adored earlier this year, had a lot of that going on. So this for me just looks like a hell of a lot of fun, and just a really interesting kind of era to be playing games in. I just love that kind of old noirish sort of Prohibition era style. So I'm really excited for this one. It's coming to all systems, pretty much all current gen systems, so as well as the Switch. Yeah, and I'm sure it'll be on next gen as well, almost undoubtedly. Yeah. And they closed the showcase by announcing that Ori and the Will of the Wisps had shadow dropped that day as well. Obviously, the first Ori game was one of the first Xbox published games to make its way onto Switch, and I think the game probably done very well there indeed. And I think this was fairly inevitable because of that. And after a 6-month exclusivity on Xbox and on PC, it is very nice to see it on the Switch as well. Alright, and shout out number 2, Ubisoft also had one of their Ubisoft Forward events as well this week. Again, any other week this would probably be a news item in and of itself, but just the headlines here. First up, Immortals Phoenix Rising, or Immortals Phoenix Rising, no colon there, remember. This was the game formerly known as Gods and Monsters, with a new ridiculously bad name as far as I'm concerned. But despite the ridiculously bad name, I think this game looks good. I think this game looks really, really good. It's basically Breath of the Wild meets God of War, and that is no bad thing at all. A more action-focused Breath of the Wild, or a more light-hearted adventure-focused God of War, no matter what way you say that, sounds fucking great. Yeah.
and it's coming on December the 3rd, Lewis, and I think it looks awesome. I don't know if you can tell.
I thought it looked brilliant as well, yeah, really impressed. To be honest, I wasn't going in with huge expectations. It really does look like just a reskinned Breath of the Wild, but yeah, with some more focus on combat, has a bit more of the traditional Ubisoft kind of skill tree progression systems than Zelda had, but that's fine. An interesting way of telling its story, where it has this argument between the gods as the overall narration, and then you're playing kind of underneath that. Yeah, I'm really excited about it in a way that I've not been for a Ubisoft game in quite a long time.
Yeah, I would have to agree. This is probably the most interesting Ubisoft game that's come out in a while for me. After this was the Prince of Persia remake. Now, it is very awesome that this game exists, and it's coming out on January the 21st. However, kind of like the Mario 3D All-Stars, this looks very much like a remaster and less like a remake, which is a little bit disappointing. But I am 100% going to play this game, like without a shadow of a doubt. It just doesn't look like, visually, it doesn't look like a modern game.
Yeah.
It looks like graphics from at least a generation ago.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is Sands of Time, so it was a 2003 game, I think, on the PS2, and it doesn't look like they've improved it much beyond PS3 level graphics, I've got to say. And I think they only announced it for current gen as well, which is sort of interesting given that it comes out in the new year. So a few odd things about that, but like you said, an absolute classic, one of our favourite games of all time, I think. So
yeah, it's a tremendously good game, and I'm definitely going to play it. But a little bit disappointing to not see it maybe quite as well realised as a remake as I'd like it to, Yeah. After that, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game, the complete collection, and this is coming out in holidays 2020. The game was an absolute cult classic, but was only released as a digital download and was delisted in December 2014, which basically meant the game was unplayable. And this is, of course, a classic example of the fact that you own nothing. So therefore it is very, very cool that this game is back, and I'm glad that for fans of that they will now have another way to play a game that they loved, which they otherwise wouldn't have. And then they closed the show out, Lewis, with Riders Republic, which is a new IP, and it seems to be an extreme sports multiplayer world. It's coming out on February the 25th for anyone that cares about those things. I don't get this game at all. I don't really know why this game exists. I can't even imagine the audience of people that are into this. But you seem to be much more positive about it than I am.
I mean, I thought the trailer was decent. As it began, I thought this is Ubisoft doing Fall Guys. It looked like some massive, big kind of race type game. And then you started to see all these other things flying in. It visually reminded me of like MotorStorm from the start of the PS3 generation.
Actually, I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
So you could see in the trailer, there was snowboarders, and meanwhile there was someone like paragliding overhead, and you could see some a skiing race going off in the distance, and some downhill mountain bikes.
But the game isn't those people racing one another, is it? It seems to be sort of gated events within a world that you're facing off against other competitors in the world, but also yourself. And I don't know, I was very confused about what it was and what it was trying to be, if that makes sense.
I mean, they haven't said much about it yet, and by no means am I saying it's going to be a brilliant game or even that I'm going to play it necessarily. I just think there's something interesting in it. What I was imagining basically was Burnout Paradise with loads and loads and loads of players in it, and multiple races of different sports starting at the same time. And I think that there's definitely going to be people who want some of that,
Well, maybe I'll be proven wrong, Lewis. Maybe I will be proven wrong. And I think if it is going to be that Burnout Paradise style of game where there are lots of things happening all at the one time and different people can join different events and whatever, and I think that could be quite cool. That is not what I took away from that trailer at all.
Maybe it won't be that.
I'm very interested to find out what it is. But I think one of the more interesting things about this is the games that weren't mentioned.
Yeah.
Most notably, Skull and Bones, still not mentioned, because I'm pretty confident that game is cancelled now. Rainbow Six Quarantine, not mentioned. Beyond Good and Evil 2, not mentioned. And no more on Far Cry 6 either. But they announced, 3 new games in this showcase. So, I don't know. I just find Ubisoft's tactics just now on what games they're releasing and when fascinating, quite frankly.
Yeah, like you say, some of those games are definitely dead in the water or in the process of being fundamentally changed. Far Cry, I think they'll probably just hold for I imagine they're going to do another one of these basically a little bit closer to that, and the launch of Watch Dogs Legion and Assassin's Creed and that kind of thing. So
yeah, I mean, I can imagine that for Far Cry, but the lack of information about the other ones is becoming concerning.
Yeah, definitely.
Or has already been concerning for a long time, frankly. And I think it would be remiss if we didn't say that Ubisoft also neglected again to mention any of the current sexual misconduct or sexual harassment claims that are currently going on at the company, or the more recent Elite Squad controversy that happened, which was just the most dumb thing in the world. If you know anything about that, you can go and Google it if you're particularly interested. And instead of addressing any of that in this presentation, they decided to make a statement on Twitter. And obviously far fewer people saw that statement, particularly when their Twitter feed was probably awash with new Ubisoft announcements from this presentation. And quite frankly, I think that their continual dodging of this issue in their presentations is cowardly and quite frankly fucking disgraceful.
Here, I totally agree.
Alright, Lewis, and on a more cheery note, Super Mario 3D All-Stars has come out this week. It's currently sitting at an 83 on Metacritic, perhaps a slightly lower score than some might have been expecting. It seems to be largely for two reasons. One, that the games are in no way remakes and are basically straight up ports of the original games. And two, Mario Sunshine isn't very good. That seems to be the two reasons that the games are marked down. However, none of that really matters, does it? None of that matters in the slightest. This is a massive nostalgia trip for most gamers. It's the games you loved as a kid, all in one place, all in one collection, on a shiny new piece of hardware. And for the vast majority of gamers that are playing this game, that is all they wanted.
Exactly, yeah.
Alright, shout out number 4, Spelunky 2 also came out this week. Spelunky, obviously an absolute indie darling, but one that neither of us have played, Lewis.
No.
But I think that might have to change because the reviews for this game are also absolutely stellar. Currently sitting at an 89 on the PS4 and a 91 on PC. But again, I don't really feel that this matters because fans seem to think that the sequel has absolutely smashed it and that it's everything that they wanted from a sequel, and it's basically more Spelunky but better.
Yeah.
And as I said, this is a game that neither of us have played. Both of us, of course, very tuned into the indie scene. This is all over the place when it comes to the top indie games ever, so I think that we might have to change this soon, Lewis.
Well, yeah, you said when we saw a trailer for Spelunky 2 recently that you were quite keen on it, so
I never really thought that I was particularly keen on Spelunky, again because it's a roguelike game.
Yeah.
But then I saw that trailer for it and I just thought, do you know what, that looks brilliant.
Yeah, it looks like so much fun and with so many interesting systems going on in it that definitely, yeah, I would love to give it a shot. I don't know how many hours I'd pour into it, but it looks like a lot of fun.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have to call it a day there. No topic of the week this week, just because of the sheer amount of news that we had to get through. But we will be back to normal next week. I promise. I know I said that 2 weeks ago, but then all this happened. But I promise we'll be back to our usual format next week. With that, I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it helps us out so much. I know I say this twice every single week, but it really doesn't become less important on a weekly basis. And it means a huge amount to us that people have taken the time to give us a review. And thank you so much to anyone that's done that. You're an absolute legend to us. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Gone Home. I have now finished it, Lewis. I finished it on our little break. Definitely not a long game, and I definitely have some thoughts on it, so I'm quite looking forward to talking about it now.
Nice. Well, yeah, I'm going to give it a bash this week, so yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and we will be discussing that on next week's podcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.